All right, guys. Welcome to Station A. We're just going to quickly review something, and then we're going to take notes on two slides of new vocabulary. Right. So yesterday we learned alleles, right? We know that alleles are different versions of genes, right? So we have the eye color gene here and another eye color gene, right? And the different gene represents the alleles, right? So alleles is the different version of the gene. So in this case, we're talking about eye color gene, and here we have brown eyes and blue eyes. We also learned dominant versus recessive, right? And dominant is always written in capital, and recessive is always lowercase. So if we take a look at this example, which we did yesterday, right? Um, we learned that we always have two alleles for every single trait, right? Because we get one from mom and we get the other letter from dad, right? So in this particular case, this organism has two uppercase alleles or two dominant alleles, right? So in this case, this organism will be born with brown eyes. The organism in the middle has a dominant and a recessive. But yesterday we learned that a dominant allele always covers and hides the recessive. So even though they have an allele for blue eyes, they will have and express the color brown, right? Because brown is dominant to blue. So the brown eye will cover the blue and the person will be born with brown eyes. Now, this person over here has two recessive alleles, right? So here, this organism, if lowercase b codes for blue eyes, this organism will be born with blue eyes, right? That's what we learned yesterday, right? You should have your notebook out here because we are going to take two slides of notes. All right, so here we go. Clear that, and we're going to move on. So let's take a look at our first slide of notes. Now, if you notice here, I have two alleles, right? Again, we get two alleles for each trait because we have two parents. We get one letter from mom, one letter from dad. In this case, uppercase T is considered dominant. And they also have a second uppercase T, which also is dominant. And I know that because dominant is always expressed, is always written capital with a capital letter. Now, this organism over here has two of the same letters, right? Just like over here, there was two of the same letters, two uppercase T's. This one, instead of two uppercase T's, it has two lowercase t's, which we know codes for being recessive, right? And we always write recessive in lowercase. This organism has two of the same allele. So if an organism has two of the same alleles, right, the same type of allele, we call them homozygous, dominant, or recessive, depending on the letters. So make sure you write this down in your notes, right? Normally how you would in class. So get that down on your T chart in the left-hand side. Give you some time to get that down. Okay. So when we're taking a look here, right? The word, if you break down the word homo means same, right? If you are a homosexual, you like the same sex as you, homo means same. In this case, we're referring to the same allele, right? So in this case, this person will be called homozygous. Has the same allele, and in this case, the same allele is dominant. So this person will be called homozygous dominant, right? And I know that because it has two of the same alleles, two dominant alleles. Now, the person to the right, the organism to the right, has the same allele, right? Two of the same letters, but they're lowercase. So this person will be called homozygous, but because they're both lowercase, they're going to be called homozygous recessive. So here comes your rule, right? These are new vocabulary words. Make sure you get this down. Right? So when there are two dominant alleles, the organism is called homozygous dominant. When there are two recessive alleles, we call that organism homozygous recessive, homozygous. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video. Pause the video and finish taking this slide of notes. And when you're done, start the video again for your second and last slide. Okay, so pause the video. When you're done, hit play again, and we'll take your last slide of notes. All right, this is our last slide of notes. Now, very similar to the other slide, if you take a look, again, we always have two letters for each gene, right? Two alleles for each gene because we get one from mom and we always get a letter from dad, right? 50% from mom, 50% from dad. We learned that last unit in reproduction. In this particular case, this organism has a dominant allele and a recessive allele. So they have two different alleles for the trait. Okay, two different alleles for the trait. When an organism has two different alleles for the trait, they are called heterozygous. Heterozygous. Get that down on your notes, your T-chart. And the word hetero means the opposite of same. It means different. Heterozygous means different. The word hetero literally means different. So this organism would be called heterozygous. And that's it. There's no dominant, there's no recessive after that, right? Because if you say, hey, I'm heterozygous for brown eyes, I know that I have one dominant and one recessive for brown eyes. Because the word heterozygous means two different alleles, a dominant and one recessive. And here is your last and final slide of notes for this word. When there are two different alleles, we call that organism heterozygous. Heterozygous. Okay, so get that down. Remember, the word hetero means different. Right? So, for example, if we go back to the eye color, uppercase B codes for brown, lowercase b codes for blue. If I have an organism that has two dominant alleles, we know that according to my code, this organism will have brown eyes. But if you go to a doctor, a genetic counselor, and test your DNA, and they say, hey, you have brown eyes, but you're homozygous dominant for brown eyes, I know that I have two dominant alleles for my eye color. I got a dominant allele from my mom, and my father also, biological father, also contributed to a dominant allele. This person would be considered homozygous dominant because they have two of the same alleles and they're both dominant for eye color. On the flip side, if you go to a doctor and they say, hey, you have brown eyes, but you're considered heterozygous. That means I have two different alleles. I have a dominant allele for my eye color and a recessive allele. I have brown eyes, but I'm also considered a carrier for blue eyes. Even though I have brown eyes, I physically, walking around the world, have brown eyes, but I'm a carrier for blue eyes. So when I grow up, I can potentially pass this blue-eyed allele down to my future children. This organism would be called heterozygous. Different, right? Different. Okay, so make sure you get the notes down. And when you're done, please restart the video and get ready to rotate to your station, to your next station.